Hello and welcome to Irreverent, podcast where we generally will try to avoid calling for war crimes, but not this week. On this episode, we're going to talk about, first of all, introduce ourselves, why we started a podcast, and what's going on with that. And then we'll follow it up by talking about some of the rather important races that happened this past weekend, starting with the Indy 500, followed up with the Coca-Cola 600, and then wrapping it up with discussion of what should happen to Monaco. I'm on the side of war crimes. And then we'll of course conclude with some news, though it's been a rather quiet week this week. But anyway, first of all, to get started, we will talk a little bit about ourselves. I'm your host this week, Eli, and I'm joined by Levi, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to him, and just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into racing, and why you want to do a podcast. It was your idea. Oh, the story of every new podcast's life. Anyway, my story in some ways is very similar, and in some ways almost exactly opposite. My first word was car. My grandpa used to race dragsters. So growing up, kind of always been around it. My dad was a big NASCAR fan in the early 2000s, back when it was still the Winston Cup. So it was always kind of a thing. But as I got older, I started to lose interest in NASCAR. Then, one year, I'm online, as, an 11-year-old will be. And I see, and I don't remember where it was, but just a headline. It says, Red Bull wins the Formula One World Championship. I didn't know much about Formula One at the time. But I did know it was a racing series for car manufacturers, so seeing that an energy drink company won kind of confused me. So I started looking into it, and started following Formula One, as much as I could at the time. It was a lot harder back then. But, of course, with it being a challenge to follow it, eventually fell off, cooled off, lost interest. Fast forward a few years, watching a random YouTube video that mentions that the current season's actually really exciting. which point I remember I have money and internet streaming is a thing again. That was late 2019. I have lost a lot of money to racing now. It's become something of an addiction. Going back to watching Formula One, getting back into a little bit of NASCAR, following IndyCar for the first time. So, yeah. Being able to just rekindle that, my love of racing games as well, has been a fun thing over the past few years, and for the agreeing to join the podcast, well, people tend to run away whenever I talk about racing. So, when the one person who gets more excited about it than me asks to start a podcast, he's not going to run away. Yep. It's a way to actually be able to talk about this without terrifying everyone. I wish that wasn't true. But with that out of the way, you'll get much more of our personalities as time goes on, trust me. We will go ahead and start our discussion of actual racing. And to start that off, we'll be talking about the Indy 500 that just happened this past weekend. The 108th running. If I could avoid knocking over my microphone. That's going to be fun for later. It's more exciting than Monaco. But anyway, at this year's running of the Indy 500, we saw for the first time in, I believe, I have this pulled up somewhere. I believe it was, I know it was over 20 years, but 22 years. Yes, looks like it was 22 years. The first double win at the Indy 500. Joseph Newgarden, of course, taking the checkered flag for the second time in a row. Interestingly enough, again with a last lap overtake on Pato O'Ward, which is depressing. But that's not really the most interesting thing. I say interesting. Actually, it's quite the opposite of interesting. When there was racing happening at the Indy 500 this year, it was quite exciting. There was a lot of not racing happening. I'll have to pull up the exact number, but if I am remembering right, somewhere around 50 laps were under caution at the Indy 500 this year. See, this is where as the co-host, yeah, you generally fill space while I look up statistics that I forgot to pull up because I'm a bad host. Oh no, I fully intended for this. Well, even if you look at when NASCAR races at the Brickyard, it doesn't take them this long. I I have not been able to find the exact numbers, but I think that part of the fundamental problem that you run into is, for one thing, something that NASCAR doesn't have to deal with as much is debris. You know, any car crashes, you get carbon fiber going everywhere. That's one aspect. But another aspect is that the cars can't self-start. Now, hopefully, after, I believe it's mid-Ohio is where the hybrid system's getting introduced. That's supposed to enable them to self-start. That led to some controversy earlier this year because it's technically already available in certain cars. One of them was the one that won the race, but let's not talk about that. Yeah. Just also ran several races last year and most of this year with an illegal overtake system. And got internally reviewed by the owner of the team, who's also the owner of the series. Yep. That's it's really not shady at all that, it was an internal review. Any other racing series, that team would have been, like, disqualified from multiple future races for what they did. If I'm remembering right. Yep. He won, and he was the center of that controversy. Because he's the one who said that he knew that it was on there. It's worth noting they didn't just take away the race ban, they also disqualified all of the other cars from the team that were running that. Now, I don't know if... Because the hybrid system is supposed to be available when it comes to ovals. As far as I know, the illegal part of the push-to-pass wasn't. Because push-to-pass, historically, is disabled for oval racing. If I'm remembering right. If I recall correctly, push-to-pass is not available on ovals usually. So, that didn't affect that. But any other team would have faced harsher penalties. That's my kind of thing. True, but it looks a lot more sketchy when the team is also owned by the company. It's bad enough. It's bad enough for other series. But when the governing body of the sport is also the owner of that team, and they don't even... I would be much more okay with this if it weren't for the fact that they did their own investigation rather than a third-party investigation or a public investigation. Yeah, it's a little bit too... It's a little too tight-knit. And I have seen people suggest that, because there have been talks about doing a charter system and a franchise system going forward for IndyCar, with possible talks that would involve the team owners also being stakeholders in the series itself. I believe so. And that would cut down a lot of this kind of shady backroom dealing sort of stuff. All that said, Newgarden raced a great race. I'm a bit more of a Pato fan, so kind of stings that he lost it on the last lap twice in a row. But you got to give props to Newgarden. He led a lot of the race. Of course, he wasn't the only one to do so. We can get to that right now, because I want to talk about someone a bit more interesting. No, we would be podcasting. We would just transverse... It would be a very different podcast. So, I want to talk about someone more interesting than Kyle Larson first. His name is Stingray Robb. That man led the third most laps of the Indy 500 this year. Yeah. A dream and a prayer. A dream and a prayer. But he also, and this is where it gets interesting, he finished the race in 16th place. 2 positions ahead of NASCAR's Golden Boy. So who in the world is Kyle Larson? No, it's a genuine question. I've not followed NASCAR for like 15 years. Well, it's funny you should mention the pit road speeding penalty thing. Do you know why he fell back to where he did? That was him? Because it was a very interesting thing for someone who had no clue who he was following the Indy 500 across the month of May. Because, like, he was good. He was really good through all of the practice sessions and in qualifying. But he wasn't racy. And the whole time, people are making it out like he's going to come and lap the field or something. But yeah, it just like actually on track, he wasn't. I mean, he was good. He had pace. He was able to keep his position until he, sped on pit lane. But it was nothing spectacular. So to have had a whole month of people making it up like he was the greatest thing to happen to racing in the past 50 years, it kind of screamed desperation from IndyCar's perspective, which is not a good look. I don't know, I just kind of, when you're making that big of a deal of someone coming out from another series, you're kind of putting down your own drivers, you know? And that's another part of it. If it were someone coming from another open wheel series, I could kind of get it. Because, like, well, like what you just said about Kimmy. He can race, but when he's done NASCAR, he's not been spectacular. Then you got SVG. The cars he's used to racing were much more comparable. So when he came over and was incredible, it kind of, it wasn't really putting anyone down. Yeah, that's a, yeah, just the V8 supercars have a bit more aero, which they're made for road courses, so. But yeah, like if it had been a road or street circuit and you've got, Max Verstappen or Hamilton or whoever coming over to do an IndyCar race, then I'd kind of get it. Right? You get them coming over for Laguna Seca or Long Beach, and it's like, yeah, they would probably be fighting towards the front. Because it's kind of an area that carries over. But to act like anyone coming from any series can show up at one of your biggest and hardest races and should be expected to be at the top, you gotta remember, some of these people have been racing at this track in this series since before the current car was the current car. Yeah, like, and the thing is, to finish well at Indy, one of the big things is you gotta keep yourself clean. Look at Herta. If Herta didn't crash, he probably wins. He had insane pace. But he dropped it. Hit the wall, spun. You gotta be consistent. You gotta be clean. He's not even faster than his teammate anymore. it just threw me off having this person who I had vaguely heard the name, not enough for it to matter much, be built up like this, and then to have, like, done good for a rookie, but just done good for a rookie. Right? You're gonna give me a month of building this guy up as something incredible. I want a show. Yeah, that sort of thing. I want to see him do something that's never happened before. Yep. But I think that about covers our opinions on Indy 500 and Kyle Larson. Had to be the last, like, 5 laps or so. Just the back and forth between Newgarden and Pato. As heartbroken as I am for Pato to have not won it, you gotta love a good fight. Especially for the lead at the end. Well, if you notice, that was the move that he did make last year. Yeah. He went a lap earlier, got passed on the last lap. So this time he went for the pass on the last lap in the front half of it and got overtaken in the back half. Yeah. Yeah, Pato, he's going to get it. But that leads us on to the Coca-Cola 600. I'm going to be as quiet as I've ever been. That would be just about the funniest outcome of this, wouldn't it? Yeah, I didn't watch all of it, but I did tune in for some of it. And the thing I noticed was just how quickly the field spread out. It seemed like anytime it got packed up, it was immediately everybody was spread across the entire oval, and people weren't really battling for position. So it's just not getting to see everyone's strategy play out, you think? It's just kind of funny seeing it go between the Indy 500, which was rain delayed, and at a certain point they knew they were going to be able to run almost all of it with from like lap literally turn 2 drivers trying to murder each other, to a race that might have to stop early because of the weather, and everybody just kind of chilling out. It's usually the other way around. We had 3 DNFs in turn 2, or turn 3. On lap 1. Yeah. The Indy 500, when there was actual racing happening, was the best race of the weekend. Its problem was it was missing like a third of its racing. The Coca-Cola 600 was just fine. Vaguely. And then there was Monaco. We'll get onto that later. What, you don't want to give me 45 minutes to rant? So what was your moment of the Coca-Cola 600? What was your moment of the race? You know what? If you're running out of things to do, we can go ahead and add the Haas news into this section. It's always exciting to have actual competition between manufacturers. Well, I just want to go back to something that you did mention. If we're going to talk about Haas now, it's strong. It's strong for you to say that Gene Haas cares about his F1 team. Yeah, no, it's just I don't think Gene gives a crap about anything but money. I think yeah, it's that's the thing. I think it genuinely is just a lack of care. Because, you got Stewart, who's just gotten more and more frustrated and disillusioned with NASCAR over the years. Like you said, going over to drag racing. And Gene, at some point, it's about money for him. And the F1 team is better advertising and will sell for more money when he decides to sell it. So, in his mind, what's the point of him keeping to spend money? He's not going to run the NASCAR team on his own. So at the end of the day, it ends up being about money, but not that there's not enough, but just that Gene is. He's not a racer. He's a business guy. And it's kind of infuriating the level of influence that someone like that can have over two high-level motorsports. Well, they were one of the top teams in the sport for a good few years, if I understand right. From what I understand, and this is as an outsider, that seemed to be from what I could tell too. It was, he was just getting frustrated with everything that was going on around the next gen car coming in, and that's what led to him deciding to spend more and more time with drag racing. Well, on top of that, there's also the unceremonious way that it got announced. Because as far as I'm aware, even like the team themselves found out the same day we did that this was happening. From what I heard, it was they basically, right after the 600, was like, all right, all hands meeting. We're closing shop at the end of the year. You all need to find new jobs. It's like, this is the team that, you know, the past, 14 years has been working for you. They've been winning for you. And that's how you're going to treat them at the end? Yeah. it's I feel like this is the sort of decision that needs to be made in the off season. Everyone needs to be told about it so that they have the entire season to look for their next career. Well, especially when your skills are in such a niche field. Because, like, there's. I mean, some of them might get jobs with whoever picks up the other charters. But that's not guaranteed. And we don't actually know where the charters are all going. I knew that was one of the ones that there was speculation that one would be going to. I didn't know it had been confirmed. But it's also, there are some positions that a team only needs one of. You don't have it for each car. But yeah, it's like for smaller teams, I can understand more deciding mid-season you can't continue, because unexpected things happen when you don't have as much of a solid source of funding and things like that. That wasn't the problem here. This had to have been something that they were thinking about and discussing from the beginning of the year. I've got to be honest, it's kind of stupid to not, like, dude misses one race. Come on. I mean, it'd be stupid to not, especially with how much media attention it's getting. Is that a transition to Monaco? I have a solution to Monaco. No, it's brilliant. We just need to convince Kim Jong-un that every Western political leader will be meeting for something in Monaco so that he nukes the city. And then we can build a new racetrack that's actually good. If you spend 10 grand to go to the race. So, to get some things out of the way, a bit of a summary of what happened at Monaco this year. Both of the Haas's somehow managed to get disqualified from the qualifying session, so they both started from the pit lane. For some reason, Sergio Perez ended up racing them. Sorry, what were you saying? True. And they didn't even get to take the starting grid. But yeah. Yep. Except it gets worse. Somehow, Sergio Perez was racing them for 16th. They started from the pit lane. He was in a Red Bull. I'm not saying this incident was his fault, because it was 100% K-Mag's fault. But also, Checo should not have been there. So, what happened is lap 1, going up the hill, Checo sees both of the Haas's on either side of him. So he starts to move to the right, up to the wall, opening up the corner and blocking K-Mag. K-Mag, seeing this, instead of lifting, decides to go for the closing gap, get his front tire right alongside of Checo's rear tire as the gap closes, taking both himself, Checo, and Hülkenberg out. 30 seconds into the race. Immediate red flag. Everyone changes over to hard tires. Yep. And that's the fundamental problem of what happens. Everybody switches to that tire. And then there are, I believe, 5 or 6 pit stops after that. For the entire race. For the first time in history, the top 10 positions did not change from qualifying to the end of the race. That's not just at Monaco. That is ever in Formula One. The only on-track overtakes that happened were because someone was running 50-lap-old hards, and someone else decided to pit for softs in the last 5 laps. That's what it takes to get a pass at Monaco now. There's a stat. Let me pull it up. This one I actually do have saved, because I knew I would need it. No. ESPN tweeted out a very fun stat. Last year, for the inaugural race at Las Vegas, you know, that race that everybody was talking about how it was going to be a bore, it was going to be terrible, the track was horrible, it was another American pandering race. 82 on-track overtakes. How many years do you think it takes to get half of that at Monaco? Close. 5. The last 5 years. Mind you, a couple of those races have involved rain, which is one of the only things that makes any overtakes happen. 41 overtakes in 5 years. Formula E has more than that in a lap. Mazda Cup's its own breed. They're built different. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. This year has taught me one thing, and it's that you want a stock car series, you go to Mazda Cup. You want open wheel racing, you go to Formula E. No one else really matches up. And that is going to be the hottest take. Mind you, I literally called for a war crime 10 minutes ago. And I also called for nuking Monaco. What was it? For the season opener, they went at some points 5 wide through the bus stop. There were multiple parts where they were going 5 wide. God, I love those crazy guys. Formula E isn't quite a spec series. The powertrains and software are different. Yes. Formula E cars are more different from each other than Indy cars are. I think Formula One has made a fundamental mistake. Because next year's the last year of this cycle of regulations. I love how they look, and the thing is, we're, a third of the way through this season, and they're finally all starting to group up. We have about a year and a half left with these cars, and then they're completely changing again. Well, that's not how you make this work. And they're changing for what, as far as anyone can tell, is an infinitely worse set of regulations. If you're gonna... Here's the thing. Just a few seconds ago, I made it clear. And I've not really talked about it too much because we're not talking about any of their races this week, but I'm a massive Formula E fan. I love it. So, I'm not anti-hybrid. But also, the hybrid seems to be causing some problems with F1. Specifically, the focus on it. I bel I was going to say, I believe that regulation cycle roughly ran from, uh, it was either 99 or 2000 to 2008, if I'm remembering right. And the technology was simpler. I like that you brought out 2021, because it's also worth remembering we weren't supposed to have that. That was the result of the regulation cycle being extended an extra year. If it weren't for that, the last year of that regulation cycle would have been 2020, where Merck slaughtered everyone. And bigger, more than they had ever done before. We're the most brilliant idiots you've ever met. Look, my solution to Monaco is dropping a nuke on it. And I stand by that. Hey, look, if we have to have the traditional race, put it in a crater. There's a reason it's called irreverent. We don't care about common sense. I don't even care about myself. I was going to say, Indy cars have the same specs since 2012. If there's one series that could do with some updates, it's Indy. I think the most interesting thing F1 could do is... Right, because their whole thing is pushing as, we're the cutting edge of technology. We're the hyper advanced, groundbreaking aerodynamics, on the limit, on the edge of what is possible. But they're not. What they need... They introduced the most restrictive regulations that the series has ever had. The engine regulations means that everyone is building an identical engine. You want to be sustainable. That's great. Here's the thing. I can't afford an electric car. You can't. most people in the world can't. Oh, okay, well, fair enough. But anyway, my point is, if you want to be like pushing sustainable, renewable technology, the way to make that advancement right now isn't so much electrification, because most of the world can't afford that. So why not just do an open engine formula with a max power output, and it has to run on solely renewable fuel sources? That can be gasoline, it can be hybrid, it can be electric. You know, like WEC does. That's what I'm suggesting, is do for F1 with open wheelers what WEC did with hypercars. Don't put oh, you have to do things this way, this way, this way. It's like, no. Here is your, downforce here's your drag coefficient. Here's your power output range. It has to be renewable fuel resource. However you achieve that, if it falls within the safety conditions, you're good to go. That's the thing. The WEC field has never been more diverse looking and never been better looking. Yeah. It's like, honestly, Formula One's next regulation should be, this is the minimum weight limit, which should be substantially lower than it currently is. It should be, here is the maximum size limit, which should be like the 2005 era size. Maximum of 1,000 horsepower. You figure out the rest. And of course, there will have to be regulations for safety features, but that's not so much a thing that you can just write in the regulation. That's a thing that has to be tested, as we saw with Sauber Alfa Romeo at Silverstone a couple years back. You can be fully compliant with the regulation, but if it's not tested properly, you still almost lose a head. Well, to be fair, it's not exactly easy to follow their races. That's the thing, is we've reached a point where more obscure series are starting to get more focused just because they're the ones willing to try something new. they were at risk of only having one manufacturer if they'd kept the regulation for another season. Are you talking about just hypercar or overall? Except Alpine. Yes, but outside of racing, who knows about them? And even then. It's a cool car. We will have an off-season at some point. I said we will have an off-season at some point. It's next year, I believe. I've got it pulled up. There are 14 manufacturers. It's more than F1 has teams. It's worth noting, these cars that we're talking about are smaller than the current Formula 1 cars. Yeah. So there are 14 manufacturers. It's Alpine, Aston Martin, BMW, Cadillac, Corvette, Ferrari, Ford. But I'm assuming that's Italian, and I've never heard of them. Isota Francici? Sure. We're both white guys. Foreign languages, not really our thing. We're American. Hey, now. Garlic's delicious. Don't have any on hand. Well, I mean, I'm on a different story. I can disappear for 5 minutes and go get some garlic and eat a spoonful of that, but it's not really. That's going to cost some people some money. I don't do that for free. Lamborghini. Lexus, McLaren, Peugeot, Porsche, Toyota. I just realized Lexus and Toyota are on this list. I know why it is, but that doesn't make it any less weird. Because Lexus is Toyota. I mean, the racing divisions are different, which is why there's two different entries. It is slightly more distanced. Yeah, but the relationship between Toyota and Lamborghini, it would be like if Cadillac... It would be like if it was GM and Corvette. Not... Well, I mean, Toyota owns Lexus. Cadillac and Chevy are owned by the same parent company, but they are two different companies. But, yeah, so 14 teams, or 14 manufacturers. There are 19 hypercar entries, which is more than there has ever been for that level of the race. So, yeah. Like, WEC is over there cooking. Formula E, they don't know what they're doing with broadcast rights, but they know what they're doing with racing. MX5 Cup is just being legends. Like, there are things that... Here's the thing. I have plenty of things to praise about F1. Such as the fact that F1 is the only racing series that actually understands how to make a streaming site. Nobody else has a clue what they're doing with that. There is... Or is that IMSA? No, it's either IMSA or it's WEC. Yes. It's... I was going to say, it's technically a Le Mans game. I believe it's called Le Mans Ultimate. Yep. I mean, hey, this is... Fundamentally, this is a general motorsport podcast, and we originally wanted to start with these races because we assumed that between the three of them there would actually be stuff worth talking about. But to be fair, don't expect us to be sitting here giving you the play-by-play of races. Realistically, we're doing this because it's an excuse for us to be able to actually talk about racing with other people. Namely, each other. It's a great way to drive women away. But yeah, so yep, may as well. I mean, we've kind of already been just in general discussion for the past 15 minutes anyway, so. Maybe do a rally every now and then. I mean, to be honest, we would have probably been able to get more time out of talking about the Formula E race that happened over the weekend than we did all three of the races that we did talk about. Yep. Say next week, racing is actually incredibly late this week. Yep. I was gonna say we'll probably have plenty of time to talk about both of those next week. And also, it is worth noting that the current plan, this was a test stream, not stream, test recording. The plan and intention at some point is to do this live. We'll have to actually figure out a schedule for that. And also to not give us an excuse to not have a terrible schedule. What, you mean delaying it 3 times after putting it off for 4 months was great? To be fair, we're more entertaining. Oh. See, if we, when we get more developed, I'll have like a soundboard so I can play a sound clip there. But instead, we just get this awkward outro. So yeah, bye. 5, you're being ambitious. Oh, and that's the outro.